Birmingham Central Library was built in 1969 to 1974 and designed by the John Madin Design Group. It is, I'd argue, the finest building put up in the city in the last 50 years. This is a tour through the library, particularly looking at the interior and its spaces. Sir Nikolaus Pevsner, the great architectural historian, argued that the history of architecture is primarily a history of man shaping space, and the historian must keep spatial problems always in the foreground. Here is the ziggurat, with the lines of its floors and the curving entrance wing. The style is what we call Brutalist, the modernism of the 60s and 70s, following the work of Le Corbusier, influenced by working buildings of the Industrial Revolution, and most of all using concrete, the great modernist material. Concrete can bridge large spaces and cantilever out, so it can create new forms and methods of expression. In James Priddy's drawing of 1978, we are underneath the library before the clutter. The huge weight of the reference floors is carried on 4 massive piers, and the rest is open space to walk through and glimpse our surroundings. Big Brum, the Edmund Street Bridge. We walk through the entrance hall inside and up the first escalator, and immediately the space opens out around us to floors and further floors we glimpse one after the other, receding away like a mirror image of the floors outside of the ziggurat which come towards us. As we climb the next escalators, there are views of corridors and rooms behind the glass, and of course the concourse inside the ziggurat with hints of the light beyond. On the 3rd floor, where the reference library starts, there is a window looking all the way back and down to the entrance hall where we started, an architectural way of saying this building is all one, a single design thought out. The reference floors themselves are linked by a series of wells, making double height spaces and giving views of the floors above and below. That originated from the client's brief. Bob Taylor, the visionary librarian who created the project, wanted users always to be aware of other parts of the library they were using, scientists to know there was an arts department, and so on. Here we're looking down a floor. When I had to write the library up for the Pevsner City Guide to Birmingham, I didn't know what to say. I was trained by classical revivalists, fogies indeed, and I'm not a modernist. But I'm slightly claustrophobic, and I ask myself the question, why don't I feel uncomfortable in this building with low ceilings? That's the key. Everywhere you go, the spaces flow gently away from you, giving you views of somewhere else. You're never confined into an area. There's always a view and a way to the next space. On the 5th floor, the spatial flow is increased by setting the floor slab back from the internal wall of the concourse, so you see down to the floor below as you walk along. This is really a bridge of books with a well just out of sight to the left. Just to finish, a detail I always like. Where the great cross-shaped piers come through the reference library floors, there are little seats in the corners, a wonderful place to sit and read a reference book. It's a mark of great buildings that you can read them in all kinds of ways. And I just want to suggest this perhaps as something light-hearted, but a way of looking at the library which might be useful if you're one of those people who seem to find it hostile and threatening and too modernist for their taste. Here we are again with the exterior of the library, with the ziggurat and the curving wing to its right. If you look closely, doesn't that ziggurat look a bit like a classical building with different proportions? Aren't those piers a bit like pilasters? Aren't those overlapping floors of the ziggurat a bit like an enormous cornice? And isn't that composition with a big main ziggurat block and a curving wing a bit like a building like this? This is Doddington Park in Gloucestershire by James Wyatt, 1796, a classical country house, but there again we have a big main block with columns and a curving wing. And it's the same composition, albeit the other way round, a mirror image, of the ziggurat and the curving wing of the library. And if you look at the west side of the library, it's even more obvious. Remember that the little pub on the left, the Yardbird, has been rebuilt and was originally a white cube, and what you've got is a central block, in classicism what we call a corps de logis, and wings either side, just like a grand country house. And so you can place the library, if you want to, in a tradition going all the way back to the 17th century. Here's Ashdown House in Berkshire of 1661, just after the restoration, perhaps by William Wynd, with a central block. It's got a very steep roof and a cupola, but that means it's got a heavy weight up top, just like the ziggurat, and some little detached wings on either side. And so the west front of the library, if you want to read it this way, you can see as a classical block with flanking wings. And that's really all. Look on the ziggurat, if you will, as a classical building reinterpreted by modernists.